Today's episode is sponsored by Future State Media, experts in off-Amazon traffic for Amazon sellers. Future State Media will build you a custom-made website to deliver sales for you on Amazon. Built to grab traffic from search engines and social media, your site can be used as a secret weapon for launching products on Amazon or just to stabilize your Amazon sales. It means you can also build an email list on autopilot. Go to futurestatemedia.com for your free guide to Google SEO for Amazon sellers today.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Michael Veazey, and today I want to talk about stock projection. This is a subset of the idea of projecting at all what is going to happen in business, and Amazon specifically, and in your e-commerce business, but more generally, which raises a number of very, very interesting questions, much bigger than just stock. So the first thing to say is that everyone wants to project the future accurately. Okay, so one way of dealing with uncertainty and future decision making, or decisions you need to take now about what will happen in the future, such as, for example, how much stock rather you order in August in order to sell in Q4 in October, November, December, or even order now in order to sell in May, or whatever the lead time is. That's a really critical day-to-day, everyday question that everyone struggles with. So the first thing is you've got to look at, number one, the idea. Projection. Can I accurately project based on something and magically wave a wand and be very, very sure about what the future brings? Now, the short answer is no, I think, is our conclusion for the mastermind today. And by the way, that's my conclusion from years of talking to some super smart and very experienced e-commerce sellers, whether they sell on Amazon, whether they're my friends or members of the mastermind, or my own experiences, modest as those are, will tell you something as well. And I think the answer is there is no magic way. There is software. Forecastly, forecast.ly is one that exists, and I interviewed the founder of that a while ago. And it's worth checking out. If you can do something that will make it somewhat more accurate, good plan. Here's the thing. That's essentially what I would say is based on a sort of chartist view of life. So in the stock market, that could be a chartist view, or momentum investing. In other words, you use the trend and you project forward from the trend. Here's the thing about projections of all kinds. They're always going to be wrong. And when it comes to stock, for example, you're always going to have one or two reactions. You're either going to, or outcomes, I should say. You're either going to be out of stock because you didn't stock enough relative to the sales value you can get, or you're going to be overstocked. In other words, you have money tied up in stock that would be better in cash or in a different set of stock that would sell. And I think my solution to this, and we bashed this around the table today, but this isn't the first time the mastermind discussion was not the first time I've had this discussion with a lot of e-commerce sellers. The end conclusion generally comes out the same, which is you're going to have one or the other. So you've got to look at which is the most painful or the most profitable, to put it the other way. So if you run out of stock, that will cost you a certain amount of opportunity cost, and you need to weigh the opportunity cost of the lost profitable sales, the profits, versus the cost of being somewhat overstocked, and then you need to make some choices. Furthermore, the 80-20 rule applies. And again, this is what we discussed today. And again, it's not a new theme, but it's worth encapsulating into one conversation, I think, because it is so basic and a lot of people miss this. Trying to be perfectionist about 100 different SKUs or however many products one ends up with is, again, a hiding to nothing, because you'll have to do so much calculation, but most of it doesn't really matter. If you analyze your sales, you'll find that a small percentage of your products, or for that matter, a small percentage of your advertising or anything else you do, is the thing that moves the majority of your profits or sales, or whatever else you want to measure. But I would argue profits is the most important, cash flow also being important, right? So if you analyze, you'll find that actually you don't need to make decisions about many things. And the other thing to say that came up after the discussion today that I think is worth putting across is that really the cost of launching new products is definite, but the upside of new products is somewhat uncertain. Whereas if you have definitely selling products that go out of stock, well, that's a sign, isn't it, that they're actually selling really well, better than you thought they were going to. So the best thing you can do is to restock products like that with a proven sales history, more than you feel necessarily comfortable with, more than is quotes unquote efficient if you're right in your projection. So if you project that you're going to sell 1,000 units a month of some product, and you put in 3 months worth of stock, that would be 3,000 units plus some safety stock. That's all well and good if your projections are accurate, but the humble thing is to recognize that, number one, your projections will be wrong, but number two, you just make a simple cost benefit analysis of, if I overstock this product, it's going to cost me this much, but if we go out of stock, it's going to cost me this much in lost sales. And therefore, if you got a product that sells really well, you're probably going to need to overstock it rather than understock it. And that's about as sophisticated as it probably gets. And that's the conclusion we came to knocking it around the table. Now, I'm not revealing any sort of patent insights here, I think, because I wouldn't do that. The discussions at the mastermind are confidential. But the reason I feel okay to reveal this is because it's not revealing anything that most of us didn't really know in our heart of hearts, or haven't had that discussion. If you haven't had a discussion with a bunch of your peers in a mastermind, trust me, if you have this, you'll come to some similar conclusion, in my experience, unless you are a genius at projection. Now, the other thing to say is this: when you're doing with future, projections is one thing. Making a sort of rough sort of picture projection, cost benefit analysis is another, but that's still basically a form of projection into the future. But what it begins to shade towards is another way of dealing with the future, which is to say, don't try and guess what will happen so much as defend your business against the probabilities that could come at it. And that goes further into things to do with Brexit for people who sell in the UK, or indeed who have stock in the UK but sell in Europe. That could apply to American businesses as much as anyone else, or Canadian or German or Australian or whatever. And then, of course, things like China and USA, they are having increasingly tension over trade, different products. Huawei, famously, TikTok now is in the sort of firing line to be banned from being sold in America. There's already import duties. All those questions, again, projecting forwards and trying to see what the future holds is part of what we have to do, and that is part of the solution. But I would argue that another way of approaching it is to consider what the future possibilities are, and then just to make your business robust against them. For example, if you source in the UK and sell in the UK, it makes no difference to your business, at least in theory it doesn't, whether you have Brexit or not. Now, of course, that isn't true, because your raw materials have to come from somewhere, and you need to analyze then your supply chain, and then it gets into more complications. But broadly speaking, the principle that I'm talking about is to see a possible risk coming, and there is an argument that says you should be just creating a business model such that it doesn't really interact with the obvious risks. Again, if you're selling in America and you're worried about the possibility of China import taxes, and in other words, import taxes on goods coming from China into the USA, I should say, then the solution, of course, is to source products that you can source in the USA. And that sounds very limiting, and it is very limiting, but I'm not saying it's a decision you should make necessarily. But it's certainly, even as a thought experiment, reveals the possibility of a different way of dealing with future uncertainty. Now, a middle of the road sort of hedge for most people that is a good compromise is to say that you don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of products that are working currently if you're, for example, importing from China, selling in the US, which is probably, for the majority of e-commerce sellers across the world, including a lot of UK-based ones, the main model they followed. It's certainly what I did to start with, and I'm the most familiar with. But you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You could say, well, what can I add to my mix of products that would be proof against the risk of, for example, just America putting the import duty up to 40%, or just banning certain imports from China, which, if you'd said that 4 or 5 years ago, would have sounded absurd, but in 2020 sounds possible to me anyway. So you could, for example, if you sell, I don't know, sports tops, start selling some kind of sports supplement, a capsule or a pill that you would take or something like that. Not suggesting that these are instant, easy solutions. These are strategy level things that you would have to sweat over for months, at least, to implement in many cases. I get it. But I think that this approach to the future is starting to blend then to fundamental strategic approaches to uncertainty, which is projecting and trying to be accurate about that, versus just hedging, not so much hedging bets, but more than that, creating decisions that are actually pretty much proof against whatever happens with the big geopolitical risks. And I would say geopolitics is, in the medium and longer term, the biggest risk factor that we need to account for. Brexit and the relationship between Britain and the EU going forwards. The relationship between Britain and China, which people aren't really talking about much yet in e-commerce, but I really think we've got to take that seriously. Britain is doing two very specific things, which is very much getting on China's nerves right now at the time of recording in August 2020. And I don't see that going away. I see that as a tip of the iceberg, or a symptom of an underlying condition, which is to say Britain needs to ally itself with America's view of the world. It generally always has. But right now it's left the EU. It doesn't have many serious trading partners left, I would argue, except for America and China. And it needs to decide if there's going to be a fight between the two, which it goes with. And two recent decisions push us in the direction of the UK government falling out big time with the Chinese, or rather than the Chinese taking a very dim view of the UK government and in their usual style punishing them in some form. Which was Hong Kong and the UK government's condemnation of the Chinese work in the Hong Kong. And this isn't a political podcast, so I'm not going to talk about the good, bad, or indifferent about the politics, but just to say that will have its knock-on effect on commerce. And the same with the Huawei decision, the decision by the UK government, which had remained fairly neutral in that, to join the Americans in banning Huawei, the Chinese company. America is now banning TikTok, the social media platform based in China, even though it's very widely used in the UK and USA and Europe. So the trend is very clearly in one direction now. I'm not necessarily saying I can predict the entire future, although I have a feeling that I can see the direction of travel very clearly, and I'm willing to see it when some people are a bit in denial about it. That's a different podcast. But I would say that if you see the writing on the wall for that, then again, it might behoove you, if that's the right word, to decide to sell something extra that you can source in the UK that is not prone to the relationship with China or Europe. So that's just to put to put it very simply, and just to make very, very clear what I'm trying to say. Projecting accurately into the future is a good plan, but humility suggests that if you've been around this game for long enough, you're going to get it wrong. Therefore, you should have also another way, a whole strategic or mindset way of dealing with the future differently, which is to create business models or product choices that do not depend on your accuracy, that are proof against whatever comes down the road. Another clear risk for Amazon sellers, or people who sell 100% of their products on Amazon, and that is an alarmingly high percentage of people with e-commerce businesses. The obvious thing is, again, to have an alternative sales channel, such as your own Shopify store, Magento, whatever, or at least another marketplace such as eBay. And again, this does not have to be an either or proposition. It makes sense to add over time to build that capability into your business. And again, it's not a question of being or either Pollyannish and saying nothing bad's ever going to happen, or being Jonah and saying, oh, the world's going to fall on my head. It's just a grown-up response to a potential risk, and you don't want to have, as one of the mastermind members put it today, and as I would put it, a single point of failure. And that's a sort of systems thinking, if you like, that no system should have a single point of failure, which is a different mentality to I'm going to project accurately into the future. So I hope this is a graspable and sensibly put way of putting it. It sounds a little bit abstract, and maybe it is, but I promise you this is the sort of concrete decision making that we all have to make every day in e-commerce or in any business. And this is the sort of thing that the mastermind members wrestle with. And as I say, I don't feel like I'm revealing any great secret hack or anything that isn't already out there by saying this. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it, because I respect the mastermind members and the confidentiality of the discussion. But I thought it was worth putting out there, because this is a topic that is talked about universally amongst Amazon sellers and e-commerce sellers. And really, I think it's very, very important to do a blend of the two things, to see the future and not to just do the chartist version of the future where you just project forward the current trend blindly. But you look at the underlying causes, which makes it a lot more tricky to project, but you've got to at least have a go. And then the, in a sense, hard implementation work, but strategically simpler work of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know these are the major probabilities of the things that could happen. Therefore, I'm going to create parts of my business that are proof against that. So if Amazon, an obvious risk, Amazon tries to shut my business down, I have an alternative sales channel. That if China imports to the US get very, very difficult, an obvious risk, that I have sources in the US and types of products that can be profitably sourced in the US. So supplements and topicals, for example. China is not the only place that does medium and low cost manufacturing. Of course, there is also Mexico, which is another alternative you sell in America. So that might be something else to accelerate putting into. these are not overnight simple fixes. These are strategic level decisions that are going to take months to implement. But I think we live in uncertain times. Dealing with uncertainty is something we have to grow up about now. We cannot just project forward based on last year or the last 6 months and expect that to be the same. And if there was any doubt about that remaining, then the pandemic has bashed that on the head. If you want my opinions on the pandemic and where that's going, that's another podcast. But I would just say that broadly speaking, the pandemic, I don't think has really changed any of these factors we've discussed, geopolitical problems and, risky single point of failure risks in systems. It's just revealed those weaknesses and accelerated everything. It accelerated the falling out between China and the US so far. That seems to be what's happening. And the US, UK and China, I should say. And also it's accelerated the adoption of e-commerce as a percentage of retail. So I don't think COVID really changes the future trends that much that I've seen. It really just, there are certain specific things around health where obviously travel products have been slammed and health has been raised to the gods. And that is predictably going to be a potential risk, and that just comes under again the heading of, okay, well, if you have a travel focused product, then now is really the time to get a health focused product, and if you have a health focused product, whilst you are going to be having a fantastic time in terms of sales, which is true for the mastermind members in that arena, equally you've got to look at an era coming maybe in 6 months, maybe in 18 months, where there will be less obsession with health, and then you've got to think about having another string to your bow. So again, you don't want a single point of failure. So I hope that there's some practical things that can come out of this discussion. It's not easy to put into a nutshell what I'm trying to get across, but in other words, projecting to the future based on what's gone on in the past is a good starting point, but it's not a finishing point. Look at underlying causes and relationships and get a view on what's coming down the pike. You have to do that. You have to see around the corner, as it were. That's what you get the big bucks for as the CEO. And if you're the CEO of a small business, you're not getting the big bucks yet, but you will one day if you're good at this game. And the other one is have the humility to recognize all your projections are going to be wrong to some degree and find a way to mitigate against risks rather than try to be totally accurate in your view of the future. So that's my summary on how to deal with uncertainty. Obviously a huge topic, so I will be breaking it down. We wanted to look at a bit more into the stock management thing. I think there are some things coming up with the geopolitical future, and then of course COVID has its effects, and those are podcasts that I'd love to get into each of those topics a little bit more in depth. But for now, thank you very, very much for listening. Hope it was thought-provoking and useful. Do, as ever, do leave us a review if you find it helpful at your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to subscribe so that you get these podcasts automatically delivered to your podcast player of choice. Thanks for listening.